Hello, welcome back to a YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.23 jungle Tierlist server draw content. Like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This was a very big set of changes towards the jungle this patch. Riot have once again done another sweep of jungle modifiers towards champions. They feel like can either be accessible within the jungle or are popular and it like encourage some level of shift over, or just generally are experimenting with certain things. It's led to a lot of variety this patch. It's why there's so many champions on the list, and I'll have to rattle through them because there's just so many. But like the key ones, for example, are Aatrox, Zahen, who got released this patch, Malphite, obviously pretty, like, lots of people are talking about him at the moment. But other things like Jace, Ornn, Fizz, Riven, Sion got modifiers, Cho'Gath, and Bessa. There's a lot of things moving around this patch. Volibear got a slight buff. Skarner got a pretty sizable buff, but it's still looking pretty bad generally. So yeah, let's get into it. D tier, I am putting 5 champions here. So to get, to begin with, Skarner staying here. Skarner needs more. He really just isn't in good enough of a state at the moment. I think Riot will probably take another buff at him in 25.24. He got some AD growth and a QCD buff this patch. I think he might have got one other thing alongside that, but he generally is just not like putting out the numbers you want out of this champion, and yeah, he's going to remain as a D tier pick at the moment. Jace, I'm also putting him in D tier. I think if you're comfortable with the champion, he actually doesn't look horrific. Like, it's yeah, I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it definitely requires mastery on the champion. So if you've played him in the top lane and or like in the mid lane and you want to play him in the jungle, I think you can definitely do that. I think it becomes a lot more accessible as an option here. It probably needs a slight bit more if it wants to be approachable for average audiences, but I wouldn't say it's terrible by any means. So I'm going to have it in the D tier purely on the basis of like the mastery curve is really, really high on this champion, and like, in the jungle, you are not going to need that same level of mastery curve. That's quite a nice thing about jungle and, like, support, for example, that some of the laners which require, like, a lot of mastery through their lane usually can circumvent that, which is why, yeah, I think that it's a bit more accessible here. Over time, I might bump him up to the C tier. I'll actually probably have him over Skarner because I think there's just more merit to Jace if you play the champion. But yeah, I'm going to leave him in the D tier for the moment. Ornn runs into the same issue Skarner has of being this, like, facilitated jungle tank, which I think in the top lane, being a tank is like a big strength of a champion at the moment. Being able to like create lower, like just not making it so there is less variance in the game can be quite a valuable tool, and generally having a scaling like option which can just nullify certain situations can be quite good. In the jungle, I just don't think it's a particularly good way of winning games at the moment, and jungle, it's so important to have high agency, and Ornn is not a high agency champion, so I'm going to remember D tier. I think if people clean up the clear and he usually like has like build some level of build refinement, I think there are some experimentations which need to be done here, like through like enchanter variants of Ornn, but he's not that popular, and I don't imagine he's going to really stick like some of the others will. So yeah, for the moment I'm going to have him within the D tier. He just isn't good enough to really like promote as one of the better options. I think if you go high like into competitive though, then it probably becomes a bit of a different story. It'll be interesting to see how this kind of lands in that situation. Think like Rel of past, for example. Fizz and Riven are the other two here. In the case of Riven, it's similar to Jace, where if you have the mastery on her as a laner, I don't think she is horrible in the jungle, but she's probably one of the weaker options. Fizz, it looks bad. Like, he's a bit popular than some of the other options, which is interesting to see. But the changes need to be more if he wants to be, like, viable long-term. That being said, though, I don't think, like, I think generally through like the scope of the changes that they've made, a lot of them have landed in a relatively playable state. Whether that's like strong or like even good off the get-go, probably not. Some of them need a little bit more to really kind of fit in with the rest of the jungle pool. But I think if these are the kind of champions you would play, if you're like autofilled and you'd want to play them in the jungle, I think there is like the opportunity to, and I think that is a big thing when you are like autofilled in some of these situations. It's a good strength to have, if anything. So the C tier then, the new additions include the likes of Bessa, who I think in time will probably be bumped up to the B tier. She looks solid. She also had a bug on the first patch which definitely like hampered her quite a bit, so yeah, long term, I mean, I say long term, like next patch I'll probably reevaluate where I place Bessa. For the moment though, I think she fits quite nicely into like the high end of the C tier. I think she is rewarding if you play her and you're really comfortable on the champion, but she does like some of her strengths as a laner really aren't going to be as like exploited as a jungler. Things like the isolated 1v1 potential of the champion, the gold scaling of the champion, the level scaling of the champion. You're just gonna have less resources as a jungler, and that will punish her. So I don't think she would be as good as lane Ambessa unless her modifiers are like good enough to kind of push her over that, which they could be. Like, once again, I'll reevaluate into the next patch, but for the moment, I'm going to leave her at the high end of the C tier. If you like the champion, though, you should put time into her. Like, you should probably, like, at least get a feel for it and see if you want to, like, continue playing her within the jungle. The other ones here are the likes of Cho'Gath, who wasn't like horribly far off before. The buff is nice. It's not enough. He probably needs a bit more to really like find his footing here. I think he lands as like a C tier option. The buff was relatively small. Doesn't really change a huge amount. The reason why you'd play Sion jungle before is going to be the same reason you play Sion jungle this patch. I think the C tier also works quite nicely for him. Another champion which probably needs a little bit more to kind of push him into being like a more viable, consistent jungler. But the idea behind the Sion jungle is like you're flexing it from top lane to jungle because the top matchup's bad. And I think if you've got comfort on it top lane, you can play it in jungle if that's the kind of thing you want to do. Obviously, you're going to get a lot of stacks when you're playing him in the jungle. That's one of the strengths of the champion. Zahen might land in the D tier. The pick got hotfix nerfed. Was it this morning or yesterday? It was either late yesterday or this morning. Actually, wait, I'm going to be recording this on Saturday, so actually it would have been the day before. So Zahen, for me, got like hotfix nerfed like 12 hours ago, I want to say. By the time this video comes out, it would have been like a bit better, like a bit longer in terms of like being able to measure the scope of the changes. It looks pretty big, and jungle Zahen definitely hasn't hit the ground running quite as well as top lane Zahen. And it's interesting to see that his mastery curve, I actually thought his mastery curve wasn't that steep, and that seems to also be shown in the data. Like, Zahen has a pretty normal mastery curve, which is interesting to see for like a more modern release of a champion. Traditionally, they actually have pretty steep mastery curves. But Zahen, yeah, I think he's too weak in the jungle. He probably needs better jungle modifiers. For the moment, I'm going to put him in the top end of the D tier, but once again, it'll be a reevaluation on where he lands after his like hotfix changes. And then Nasus didn't get buffed this patch. He's just got some level of player base in the jungle, and I feel it's appropriate to like add him back now that a lot of the other top laners are kind of popping up here, because he does like have a legitimate player base, and I think it's fair to like have him as one of these options. I don't think jungle Nasus is bad. Like, I think you can make him work in the right situations, and I've actually seen it work in like Master Elo, which is always curious to see in certain spots. Nasus top lane isn't in the greatest of states. That's a pretty well-known fact. You're kind of dependent on like counter matchups, and a lot of the weaknesses of Nasus top aren't going to be punished in jungle, and that's big for the champion. That being said, though, he's relatively slow around the clear, and he kind of relies on being able to ramp up over time. But I think if you can get away with that, then yeah, I think the pick can definitely work, and it probably becomes, you're probably like punished a lot less in average brackets, so I think that could definitely be one of the strengths of the champion. The other picks within the C tier, I'll kind of rattle through them. So Sejuani, similar issues to like the Ornn and the Skarner, where she is, Sejuani has similar problems to Skarner in the fact that she is a relatively pro-jailed champion, and because she's a tank in the jungle, she ends up being relatively low agency for solo queue. I don't think she's horrible, and I think if you like want to utilize her as like an enabler, I think that can be fine, but she definitely struggles like as one of these higher agency junglers. Shyvana's been neglected for a while now. I just don't recommend Shyvana. She's not been in a great state for a decent amount of time. Her popularity drops every single patch, and as like a neglected option, she's not worth investing time into at the moment. For average brackets, she's playable. Like, I think that's the most I can kind of say about the champion. Gragas, he needs a bit more. Like, a lot of the top laners which have been like enabled to kind of function in the jungle, he needs a bit more damage to kind of clear at the same rate. And it's obviously like Gragas has historically been able to jungle pretty solid as an option, but these days, yeah, I'd say he kind of sits in the C tier. If you're an OTP or you're comfortable with the champion, you play it every so often. Outside of that, he's just not really supported enough as a jungler. Pantheon, Vi, kind of similar issues of being competitively bound at points. They're not horrible junglers, but they definitely are outshined in solo queue by other options, unless you can kind of get the spots where you want to utilize like Vi Ultimate or Pantheon Ultimate, for example. Hecarim sits within the C tier at the moment. He he is he's one of his healthier states, if anything, but he's very snowball dependent. You kind of need to be ahead of the curve to really get a lot of value out of this champion. If you're not, then yeah, he really suffers. He's really squishy, and I'd kind of recommend just being an OTP of the champion to kind of really understand your potential as a pick. If you're not, then yeah, he ends up just being a lot less valuable than a lot of the other like AD bruisers slash skirmishers. Rengar, if you put the time into him, he can be a really rewarding champion. I don't think he's like overpowered as like an OTP option at the moment, but he's still strong. Like Rengar is still going to be one of the best champions to OTP, and just generally the entire game. Like that is one of like the strengths of the pick, and the recent kind of changes to his I actually haven't seen how like the recent changes to his like scripting have affected him. I'll kind of like I have to ask someone who's an OTP. I mean, I actually just check the data right now because like I'm curious to see if his win rate's like shifted quite aggressively. But as I'm talking about it, like yeah, Rengar, very heavily OTP champion, someone who you need to invest a lot of time in to be really rewarding. But if you do, yeah, you can definitely stomp games, and he performs really well in Elite. He seems to be performing at like a same level as I remember him performing at in the previous patch. So yeah, I'll leave him in the C tier for the moment. Zed, Kiana, relatively similar issues. They are pretty OTP dependent. You need to invest a lot of time into them to really make them quite valuable options. But if you do, they can be really, really powerful in the right hands. Nidalee, I think she kind of fits in with the other picks here, like in terms of you need to sink a lot of time into her to really be rewarding, but they are great time sinks, and I would recommend them if that's the archetype of champion you want to play. I wouldn't recommend them if you just aren't willing to sink enough time or like borderline OTP these champions to kind of get that value out of them. And then there's Brand. He still remains in the C tier. I leave Brand at the top of the C tier because I think he's so close to being able to compete with some of the other AP options as like an AP burn mage in the B tier, but he just doesn't. It's just not enough. Like he needs like 5% more on his burn, and I think he would genuinely be more competitive as an option. But I think the other options are just better and like have like more sports or do certain things, have certain matchups which they are just more promotable in. So Brand. Oh, God. Sits at the top of the C tier. I just lost my breath for a second there. So, yeah, Brand sits towards the top of the C tier. I don't think he's horrible, but I think he's just outshined by the other options in the B tier. So, the B tier AP pool. There's quite a few of them. I did have Silas here. That was a misread. Silas with the nerfs is still really good. In fact, I'm probably going to bump him all the way to the top of the A tier. Maybe even S tier. He's putting out really good numbers this patch. That was just like an overshoot from me. But the other picks here include Eve, who is if you're comfortable with the champion, I think she can be played. She's a bit weak at the moment. I think that's just like the issue of the champion. If she had slightly more damage, I think she'd genuinely be a pretty competitive AP option, like as like a assassin. But right now, she kind of just sits towards the lower end of the B tier. Karthus also in more recent times has felt like a bit more neglected. I don't think he's horrible, but I also think you need to sink a lot of time into him, which is why he also kind of sits towards this Eve side. Gwen, if you're given time to like ramp up on this champion and you play her in the in just games where you can get a lot of value out of her like percentage damage and her just general scaling, I think she's pretty good. And yeah, like even after the changes, she's kind of still solidified herself as a solid AP option. Udyr, niche, not terrible, but not in his best state. I think he has issues with his itemization at the moment. Obviously, you're still playing around that like Liandry core if you're playing like the AP Bruiser variant. For AD, you're playing like the Trinity build. I don't like AD Udyr that much. I think it has a lot of issues, especially like in the current state of the game, and there are just general compositions and individual champion counters which can really like mess with him. But generally AP Udyr, I think it's fine. Like I don't really have anything much more to say about it. I think you just want to be really comfortable on it and just put the mastery into it, and you'll probably be able to make him work in like a decent chunk of spots. Talia is better with her recent jungle modifier buffs, back when they did like the changes to mid lane to make her less tied to double mana items. They gave her some like jungle help in amongst that, and yeah, I think she sits as like a B tier option now. Not amazing, but not terrible either. Teemo also is another champion just in need of like another 5% more damage on his jungle modifier. If he did, I think he'd be a lot more appealing as an option. For the moment though, he just sits in amongst the other AP options where if you're comfortable with the champion, you'd probably pick him over the other things around him. If you're not, then he just ends up being a bit of a non-factor. Zyra sits around here, really fast clear speed, one of the fastest in the entire game, if not just outright the fastest. Like her and Zed are obviously up there as like two of the main ones. I still think she's really good, and if you understand how to utilize tempo really effectively, she's really great at manipulating that. If you're not comfortable with the archetype of the champion, then yeah, she also becomes like one of these other AP options where a bit of a non-factor. And then Morgana and Lilia wrap up the B tier. I have these two higher because I think Morgana has really good specific matchups where she can really shine as an option. And in the case of Lilia, I just generally really like her as a counterpick to like slow-moving, tankier compositions without the tools to really lock her down. I think these two just end up being my like higher recommendation options in that regard. And then the two picks which I've added here are Aatrox and Malphite. So in the case of Malphite, he seems to be doing pretty well at the moment. I might bump him up to the A tier next patch when people have refined the builds. AP Malphite looks to be just the worst way to go on him at the moment. Actually, I'll put him up to the A tier. I think Sunfire Malphite looks really good. I know a lot of people still go with the AP Malphite, and it looks to be pretty underperformant if you go that. Sunfire Malphite looks really solid. So yeah, Malphite, I'm going to bump him up to I'll have him at the low end of the A tier. I'll talk about the rest of the B tier champions, and I'll wrap round to him. So yeah, Aatrox I'm going to leave within the B tier though. He's not bad. I think the buffs were really good for him, and in fact, I think he sits at a high B tier, where if you have if you could have a good amount of mastery on a champion, you'll be really comfortable playing him. And yeah, I think that's about where you'd want these champions to kind of land, where if you're good at the pick, they can be rewarding if you flex them into the jungle, or if you're auto-filled and you just want to play these champions. So yeah, Aatrox, gonna have him in the B tier now. The other picks in the B tier which remain are things like your Lee Sin, which are fine. I think if you're comfortable with the champion, then he's really good. Obviously, we're still going to be one of the most popular junglers of the game. Still a lot of skill expression within his kit. Yeah, he's fine. Shaco, if you're comfortable with the champion, you'll play him. If you're not, then he just ends up being a must avoid. Like, he's practically only played by OTPs, and it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of unique kind of mechanics within his kit, and he's kind of reliant on, like, certain things within the game to go right for him to really be quite valuable, especially like an AD where you need to like snowball, especially like early on into the game. Some of your other AD options include the likes of Kindred and Graves, where I think Graves, with his recent changes, has definitely found his footing a lot more. He's still very high income reliant, and I mean, it's kind of akin to the Kindred, where you also want a lot of gold on Kindred. I think I'd still recommend Bel'Veth, probably, if you're like looking for champions in a relatively similar archetype chain. I think she's just a little bit better at the moment, but all three of these champions are going to be innately elite skewed, which is why I don't have them too high up the tier list. Neferi, Nocturne, other AD options in this tier at the moment. I got Talon. That's not Neferi. So yeah, Neferi, I think is a fine like option within your AD pool. She's just fine at the moment, like a lot of the B tier. And Nocturne, his nerfs back when they like buffed experimental hexplay were just too much. I think he is just a bit below the bar at the moment. I think Nocturne with his mastery curve should probably be an A tier option. Right now, I wouldn't say I wouldn't recommend him, because I do think there are spots where he can be really valuable as a champion, but he's definitely not up there as like one of the top ones at the moment. I think he's just a solid B tier AD option. Zac, Poppy, and Talon wrap up the B tier. I'm actually going to bump Zac up to like with Malphite, because obviously Sunfire got buffed this patch, and that's going to really help Zac's clear. He was a top of the B tier option, and now I'd say he's solid A tier. Like, if you like that kind of champion with like the long range engage, being able to dish out a lot of damage whilst also being pretty tanky and like acting as this like sustained tank, sustained tank, then yes, he's really like shines as one of those options. And yeah, Poppy and Talon. Talon, his recent nerfs did affect him, not hugely. I think if you're comfortable with the champion, then he kind of still fits in that vein of like your Nillys, the Kianas, the Zeds, the Rengars, where they can really do a lot within the game with that mastery. Like, but if you're not comfortable with the champion, then they end up being picks which I'd recommend just avoiding until you feel comfortable playing them, like, because you've sunk so much time into them. And Poppy, I think she's a great counter pick option. You're still playing like the Divine Sunderer build, but the recent buffs to Halo Blades help her if you go that. You can still go like your Phase Rushes, your Aftershocks, your Glacials even, your Dark Harvest. There's a lot of keystones which can function on this pick, and yeah, I'd say she's a solid B2 option, just kind of dependent on being a counter pick again. So the A tier then, I've bumped up Silas and Volibear. So I'm missing a champion here. Who did I not talk about? I didn't talk about Zahin. Where is he? Did I? Wait, did I not include him? Oh, I did include him. Oh, I put him in the D tier. Wait, that's not. Wait, I'm losing my train of thought. It's fine. We got this. So yeah, the A tier then. I bumped up Volibear. Volibear is going to be within the A tier. He got 3 AD buff this patch. It kind of brings him back to being a more reasonable pick again. He's not a high A tier option, and Volibear meta within the jungle is kind of over at this point. So it kind of goes back to being this pick where if you're comfortable on it, I think he's a great jungler in terms of like what his kit provides. Point and click CC, great dive potential with the ultimate, great just individual dueling capability. There's a lot of things to really like sing about with this champion's kit, and I think the buff has brought him back to being a solid recommendation again, just not the like meta champion he once was. Other picks within the A tier kind of like remain relatively similar. It's like your Canes, which I think if you're really comfortable on can be really good. It's just about picking the right form in the right game. Belveth is a great snowballing champion. She needs a decent chunk of mastery, and you need to really understand how to kind of like invade with tempo, being able to steal away like certain camps to really snowball and like there's like give yourself advantages within the game. Tarek. Trundle. Oh my god, I cannot think straight today. Trundle is a really good answer to things like tankier compositions, being able to utilize the subjugate to really nullify like the strengths of those team comps. Still works really nicely as like an answer to like your Xin Zhao's, for example, and these immobile AD threats within the jungle. So it really shines as an option. Rammus, low agency, but incredibly tanky at the moment. He is very easy to play, and those are the two selling points of the champion. You do just end up with a reliance on your teammates, and that can definitely feel rough in the current state of the game. Ivan still remains in the A tier at the moment. I think he's pretty solid as like an enchanted jungler. If you're comfortable with the pick, then you'll play it in spots where you feel like you can get value out of it through the shielding and through the bushes. But if you're not comfortable with the pick, then you probably just end up avoiding it. He's like the least popular jungler for a reason, or like main mode jungler for a reason. Fiddlesticks, Nunu, also some of these more like niche options where they don't have huge player bases, but they can be really powerful at what they do if you're very comfortable with them. Nunu's gank potential is one of the most oppressive in the game. Fiddlesticks Ultimate is also a very, very potent ability, being able to do a lot. He does have a bug at the moment, where shields deny you from being able to like fear them, so that is something to note with the champion at the moment. And if they don't fix that bug, or if it's intended, then he ends up being weaker for that, so I'll reevaluate that in the next patch, but just something to note for the current patch. Elise, Mordekaiser, other AP options. Mordekaiser, I think, is a really underrated jungler at the moment, being able to work quite nicely into heavy dive compositions, and generally is pretty solid. I think he's actually really underrated. Elise, I think ever since they did those changes a while back, she's been a lot more appealing as just a general jungler. Not quite as egregiously early game skewed, still going to be early game skewed. You still want to snowball your advantages, but definitely, like, if you're comfortable with the champion, I think she's in a really good state at the moment. Probably not my number one AP option. I still think that goes to Diana, but she's definitely up there. Kha'Zix, I think he's a really good state at the moment, being a really good AD assassin. With a lot of the other things being nerfed around him, he has really stood up as like a great option. So yeah, Kha'Zix, I really recommend him as like an A tier AD assassin at the moment. Xin Zhao, Wukong, Yi, Rek'Sai wrap up the A tier. In the case of Xin Zhao, he's a really good just jack of all trades jungler. I think his nerfs ended up impacting him a bit, which is why I don't have him in the S tier, because I think there are compositions where you can really struggle into like your Jaxes and your I say Jack Shen like this is like common, but I do see this a decent chunk when I'm playing Xin Zhao if I'm auto-filled. But there are team compositions where you just can't really accessibly get onto targets, and it can feel quite rough for the champion. Wukong does have a slow clear and does take some time to get going, but I think when he does get going, he is one of the best junglers in the game. His Trinity Sundered Sky Spike is incredibly powerful. His ultimate is a great tool for like skirmishing and scrapping, being able to like secure objectives with the power of that ability, and his map mobility with W as well is really nice. Yi is a great snowballing jungler. If you can get ahead of the tempo, you can really stomp games. You want to be comfortable on the champion. He's not, I mean, he's more appealing for average brackets now, because there was a time where he was elite skewed. But generally, like, if you know your limits and you're able to take over the game, he does so much damage and he can be so oppressive, which is why I think he fits really nicely into the A tier. Rek'Sai did get nerfed this patch. It was top lane focused, but it does have some level of impact in jungle, which is quite funny because she gained almost like 1% win rate, which is like a consequence of like all these junglers coming in, but like the general jungle pool gained about 1% win rate, with like Riven, for example, having like a 44% win rate, which is always funny to observe. So yeah, Rek'Sai, I have her in the A tier. I think she's a great jungler, and honestly, I recommend her. I genuinely do. Even though she's a bit niche and she does have some like interesting like mechanics on her, I would, yeah, I think she's like really good in the current state of the game. So the S tier then, I am bringing Briar and Warwick up, and I'm gonna pair them alongside Mundo and Amumu, as I would say these are the like low bracket of champions where I think they're really good, like from gold to like honestly gold to diamond. I think they really shine as options here. Mundo I'll talk about a bit more in depth, but like especially Amumu, Briar and Warwick, that's where they really shine as champions. The higher up you go, the more they'll be punished for their weaknesses, such as their clear, their like reliance on like chaos within the game. In the case of Mundo, he does perform better in average brackets because he is a scaling champion. That's not to say that he performs badly in like high MMR brackets as well. Like Natty Nat, for example, is a great person to watch for like Mundo, like how to play Mundo within the jungle. So I'll always like recommend doing that. But yeah, Mundo, the recent buffs in this patch, really good. And once again, pushing back up to the S tier. I think he's a really good jungler at what he does. Silas, he should probably belong in the S tier, especially in elite brackets, because he does perform better there. For average brackets, you will struggle sometimes, and I think there are compositions where he can definitely be quite bad. But if you are able to drop your pick to like 2, 3, or 4, 5, maybe, things like that, then the champion gains a lot more value. It's just if you're first picking, then I would recommend avoiding Silas as an option, because you will end up into compositions which just counter you or don't have good ultimates for you to work with, and that will definitely make the champion a lot worse. I still think he's great at the moment though, and like I definitely overshot with his placement with the nerfs, because he is still putting out really good numbers. And then the other picks from the S tier, these kind of make up the main core. Viego is still a really good jungler, especially in solo queue. He is the most popular jungler in gold plus brackets, and it makes a lot of sense. He is a really good get one takedown within within a fight, and then just snowball your advantage and that kill so much to just like 1v9 basically. It's a really like good selling point of the champion, and he's in a really good state at the moment. Jarvan is my recommended just like default jungler. The CC, the setup, the utility, the damage that this champion it just makes him such a good full package of a pick. And the lockdown is really nice for a lot of champions to play off of you. That is like going to be one of the biggest strengths of the champions, and in a way his biggest weakness, where if you don't have the tools around you to kind of play off your cage and your setup, then he ends up just being a lot less valuable, and he will struggle into anti-dive compositions, but still just a really good pick at the moment. Diana and Echo are still great AP assassins within the jungle at the moment. I really like both these picks, and they perform really well. Diana, even with her recent nerfs, still performs great, and they're still great champions, which are very similar to each other in terms of like their damage profiles and how you want to build them. But Echo really shines as a counter gank jungler, and Diana really shines as this like mid-game skirmisher. And then Jax jungle almost got nerfed 2 patches ago, which was quite funny to see, because Jax jungle has been sleeper OP for a while now. I think he's incredibly good at what he does, being this like nullifier to auto attackers, whilst being able to just do a lot of what Jax top wants to do in the jungle. So yeah, Jax, his clear is decent. His individual like dueling potential is incredibly good. His counter strike is a very powerful ability, and his ganks are really nice. Like there's just a lot of things which make this champion really good at the moment. And Riot didn't nerf him, so I would still continue to recommend him as one of the options. I know those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.